God and Other Delicacies has a weekly newsletter. If you'd like to subscribe, email me at godsdelicateshow@gmail.com and I'll put you on the list. Hello, everyone. Welcome to God and Other Delicacies. I'm Nicholas D'Augusto. I love talking to people about the way they relate to the concept of God in their lives, how they were raised, how they feel about it today. And what's wonderful about that is that that's exactly what I get to do on this show. So let's get to it. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Michael Hitchcock to the show. Michael is an extraordinary actor, writer, and improvisationalist, best known for his work in Christopher Guest's films such as Best in Show and Waiting for Guffman. As a writer, he's been a part of award-winning series like Glee and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I had the joy of having him naked tackle me multiple times while we were on Trial and Error together, as well as somewhere in there also becoming his friend. Believe me, these are honors I do not take for granted. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So good to have you.
I can't wait to take off my clothes and tackle you.
I can't wait to be injured. No, you were very
injured.
No, you were very, very gentle. Your tackles were very considerate. Empathic tackling, I feel like.
It was the strangest. We were on a TV show called Trial and Error together, and it was really fun. But I played a client of Nick's who was in jail at the time, and for some reason I loved to tackle people naked, and the fun part about that was just I would literally be standing on these boxes and have to kind of try to Superman fly into the screen.
Well, one of the extraordinary things we learned was that even if you gave a running start, the joke was that you were fully horizontal by the time you entered the frame, so they actually made you jump from higher up.
Yes,
and then of course I'm falling on a mat,
right?
And we felt fine and all that, but then there's of course allowing just the tape to run,
right?
And minutes of you just fully on top of me.
Right. And I'm wearing just the skimpiest nudie underwear ever. And which is probably not the worst of it. The worst was probably just how much I was sweating.
No. It was all for the comedy.
Oh man.
We couldn't either we were going to hate each other or love each other. And thankfully we came to love each other. Well, thanks for being here, man. So, as I mentioned to you, the thing that we start this off with is what did you have for breakfast this morning?
Ooh. Well, I have a protein shake every single morning, and I had it with coconut milk, and then I had yogurt with maple syrup, and then I had 2 cups of coffee, and I think that's it.
You really got going.
Yeah.
Did you read the paper fully? Do you read a ton of paper in the morning?
I don't. I do a weird thing. I watch the morning news, and then I also watch late night TV that I've DVR'd.
Oh yeah, okay.
So, but I watch the first 5 to 7 minutes of all the major CBS, NBC, ABC, and compare how they do the morning news. Yeah,
just the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You want just the headline.
I want the headlines.
Okay.
And then
interesting.
And weirdly, of CBS, I'm a huge fan of Gayle King, Oprah's best friend.
Oh wow.
She is.
So she is always winning. She's always winning the morning.
Fantastic. I think she's really good. She's on CBS Morning News, and she's really good.
Oh, great, man. That's a recommendation I'll take.
I know. It's really good. But so
well, good.
And then the late night stuff, I like to watch the opening monologues to see, because a lot of them are doing news of the day.
Right, yeah.
And I like to hear how they comically spun it.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's my morning.
That sounds like a lovely morning. I'd like to join.
It's kind of fun.
All right. Well, then, the next question is, how and when were you introduced to the idea of God in your life?
Oh, boy. We go from breakfast to God.
That's why it's a nice, easy transition. That's why I start with breakfast. It's a one step to the right. It's actually like a neutral question.
I mean, I grew up in a smallish town in Ohio called Defiance, Ohio, which was known as Fort Defiance back in the day, because there was a fort built on top of a hill, and it overlooked 2 rivers that converged. And it's primarily was back then, and still is, it's a General Motors town. They build engine blocks there, and my dad worked for General Motors. And it's about 12,000 people. Anyway, I'm
Is
just
the
setting.
town still doing well despite all the
it does okay.
modern, shipping overseas and people?
It's lost business over the years, and then it's also been kind of the victim of what most small towns have where the big box stores move in, and then all the shops downtown struggle and all of that business. But they've kind of found their way, which is good.
Good.
But yeah, so I grew up in this Ohio town where it's very funny because it was we grew up Protestant. We went to the First Presbyterian Church in Defiance, and I can remember it was weird to meet a Catholic because we just hung out with mostly, I guess, Presbyterians. And I can remember,
relate.
so I was a little kid, and it was just a normal thing to do. We went to church every single week. That particular church had extremely creative programs for children. Like they had like a little mini kiddie church called Wee Kirk, which is W-E-E Kirk. Not sure.
And Kirk is German for
children.
For church.
Oh, for church.
So
little church.
Yeah, exactly.
You would think I would know that.
Well, it's also interesting because Protestantism is out of Luther, and Luther was German, and so
they had the thing where like this older woman, Mrs. Simmons, gave like little mini stories about usually like the church mouse or something that she make up, and then
that's going on simultaneously with the adult service.
Yes.
Okay.
And then kids had like their kid choir. There was a kid who played the organ, so it was kind of like, ooh, this is cool, and you don't have to sit through boring adult stuff. You can be with kids and get involved, and so all of that was going on. There was Vacation Bible School during the summers. Where
how far away would you go?
You would go to the church. And
so the vacation you would like do like they'd have like little camps at the church.
Yeah, they'd have like little things for the kids, and honestly, I went because we got free graham crackers and Kool-Aid.
Right on.
But that was,
That's
they're no dummies. They know how it works. And then weirdly, Mrs. Simmons, besides doing this children's thing, she also ran like a special boys' church program where it sounds really bizarre because it's guys, but we put on marionette shows.
Oh my gosh, how fun.
And she would write them, and they were always, I'm sure, biblical to some degree, or at least moral. And I don't remember anything about what they're about. I just remember that she had all these like really cool handmade marionettes, and it was only the guys, like back in Shakespeare days or something. The girls weren't allowed to do it.
And it was a female teacher.
Yeah.
Which is also ironic.
Yeah, I know it is. And the girls had their own thing going on. But, and I'm not sure what they did, but they didn't put on the marionette shows. That was for the guys.
Well.
So weirdly, I started very early with religion and show business combined.
Yeah, was that one of your first memories of performing?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, like you're 6 or 7 or 8, something like that?
Yeah. In fact, one time I can remember she goes like, okay, kids, we're all going to get together and have a brainstorming session. I thought, well, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
And then we're all going to get to say our piece, and then she just kind of ran, she just kind of did whatever she wanted, and it was kind of a good introduction to Hollywood where the boss gets their way, always.
Right, the taste of the joy.
Yes.
But yes. Exactly.
Brainstorming. Mrs. Simmons, you lied to us. But it was still cool to be included.
So you have these really beautiful, like, fond memories of just being a child in the environment. When did you start to, have thoughts about the environment? And I guess what I should say is also alongside that, how long did just sort of the joy of the arena of that like still have a positive effect on you?
Yeah, I think I think the weird thing about at least in that time period, which was the '60s, because I'm old.
So this is mid '60s or something,
like
or
mid
late
'60s when I was a child.
Yeah,
because later we moved to the Chicago suburbs. But
okay, right, yeah, I didn't know actually that you were from Ohio.
At least, so way back then. At least for the kids portion of it, it was all God is love, that sort of thing. And then
which is beautiful.
It is beautiful. It was actually the simplest, it'd be like Jesus loves me, this I know. It would be those kind of things where it was laid out very individually. And then when you begin to question everything is probably Santa Claus versus Jesus, where, we're all told about Santa and Santa, and then at some point, you figure out what's really going on, and then you think, well, that Jesus story. I mean, Santa sounds almost like more believable Jesus coming out of a virgin, which back then I didn't even know what that was.
Right, sure.
So a lot of the magic part of it, I didn't even comprehend until later when you find out about sex.
Right. Yeah, not to mention that like the resurrection part is, some of the, you're like, okay, so he was in the tomb and then all of a sudden they open it and he's not there.
Oh, yeah.
What does that mean?
And then this is getting off the point, but like at least with the Presbyterians, like the last chapter in the Bible is the book of Revelation. And we just skip that because it's so confusing and like so scary that's like, well, we don't really talk about that too much. So we just never really read it because, it's all about death and destruction and the apocalypse and everything else. And so, yeah, we just skip that part.
Yeah.
But I want to get back to Santa for one second.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I can remember in 5th grade, by that time I didn't believe in Santa anymore, but I did believe in getting my name in the paper. So I wrote a letter to Santa, which they published in the paper because you would send the letter to the local paper. So I got my picture and my letter.
So you knew? So you were?
Yes, I knew, but I wanted to see
it.
I know. I wanted to see
great.
my
Also
name
an introduction
in
to Hollywood.
I know, right? A little self-promotion.
To betray your beliefs.
Exactly.
For the outcome.
That's so great. And then I think in Ohio and many other places, you also had groups come in, and one of them.
What do you mean?
Outside groups, entertainment groups that were religious based or quasi-religious based, and the one that I remember the most was Up With People. And,
I remember.
Yeah.
I don't know them very well, but I remember they were very influential. Well, they were, obviously this was a different generation, but they were a very influential name as I was growing up. I didn't really know them.
They were sort of in the 60s because of, all the hippies and everything else and anti-war protests. They were kind of like, well, there's also good youth too who are promoting, moral values. So they would sing songs literally like Up With People, which how controversial is that?
Right,
it's like,
exactly.
Of course, everybody wants to be with people. And then their other big hit was What Color Is God's Skin? And the answer, it's every color, except it was in rhymes. So, and that weirdly was controversial back then too. And what also made the group controversial at the time was it was integrated, which a lot of groups weren't, or at least.
Do you mean integrated both gender and race
you would see different races, which in Ohio in that time period, we saw white people, and that was about it.
I have a very similar upbringing. Absolutely, I relate to that upbringing.
Yeah. So those kind of shows would come through town every once in a while, and they would take place at the church. And then with Up With People, you would sponsor the kid, and they would sleep at your house or whatever, and you'd feed them. And it was just part
interesting.
Of,
so they would ask for shelter.
Yeah,
they would come and
keep their costs down.
Yeah. Wow, interesting. So now that was something that was separate from the church, but church sponsored. Church sponsored, and then the families would sort of take that more because then you would have maybe one of the performers is at your house, and you get to have dinner with that performer,
and they weren't so much like God. It wasn't that. It was more like we're all one big happy family world. It was that kind of a thing. And as corny as it was as a kid, it was fantastic. And because these people came in and did their thing,
I mean, they're performers, professional artists,
and you saw people outside of your comfort zone, like, there's this person and that person, and they all seem to be friends, and like, ooh, that's interesting.
And how were you taking cues from your parents' reaction to this? Obviously, they were supportive, but you're also talking about you're talking about the experience of seeing something different, and your parents are the adults in that situation, and they're seeing something different. Do you remember?
My parents were they were very cool about all that stuff. My dad would always say, no matter what, he goes, they were kind of products of the Depression, or they were kids at the tail end of it, and they were like, we grew up poor. Everybody was poor. There was no difference. It didn't matter if you were black, white, brown, whatever. Everyone was poor.
Cool.
And we all got along and we all helped each other. So we grew up in a very, I think, progressive time for that, because I can also remember going into a store and there was a gumball machine and some kid pulled out what was a black gumball. It was like licorice, and the mother took it out of his hand, threw it on the ground, and said, "You're not going to eat that. You're not going to eat a black thing."
Wow.
But she didn't say black. She said the N-word. And this was when I was a little kid, and you're just like downtown, And it was, my mother was furious, but she didn't say anything, and we were marched out of the store. So that was definitely going on.
I also have some relationship to that in that my grandmother's generation was she's very Italian, and they were very working poor Italian, railroads and service industry stuff, and she was very specific about identifying herself as something different than black people,
right?
Despite the fact that they were all in similar economic positions,
right?
Yeah, it's horrible, memories, of course, to in the sense that it takes a long time to recognize that those were very impressionable to you at a young age if you don't have someone guiding you. It sounds like your parents were guiding you properly.
They were, I have to say, and plus my mom, as far as religion went, more so than my dad, but both of them, but my mom was also a bit wary of like the evangelicals, which, the evangelicals are much more conservative than, say, Presbyterians were, or Methodists or whatever. Because when she was
activist.
Yes, so when she was a little kid, she lived in a even smaller town in Ohio, and they would have revivals come through. And the revivals, they'd set up a tent, or they'd have them in a town hall or something like that, and people would come up and get saved, and it would be these guest preachers who would preach fire and brimstone, and my mom played the piano at them. And she got a bad taste in her mouth because of it, because she said, every year it's the town drunk, getting saved, and then he's right back at the bottle. And she felt that like these people were kind of taking advantage of the town a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So she was always a little bit wary of, I think, people that were, in for lack of a better word, Bible thumpers. Mm-hmm. So that was going on.
Yeah,
too.
sir. It's we don't have to look much further than like televangelists, to see what you have to ask the question of sincerity versus show.
Yeah, but back then in a small town, or even it could be Anaheim, California. It doesn't have to necessarily be a small town. These things, there's not a whole lot to do at times, so everybody went. You know what I mean? It would be like if the circus was coming or a carnival was coming, you also went to the revival shows because it was something to do and it was entertaining, and you'd get these preachers who were not your standard guy. And apparently my dad was I asked my dad about this the other day. He said that back then a lot of the preachers in these small churches were probably just farmers who preached, as a side job, basically. So it wasn't even a full-time thing because the small town couldn't support them.
Wow.
So, yeah, a lot of that was going on, too.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so your mother was a performer also. She was a pianist.
She was a pianist.
And your father,
yes.
was he a performer as well?
No, he was not. He doesn't like performing. No, he didn't really do that. He has a great sense of humor, but he didn't do that. And then going back to my grandparents, I had two grandmothers who, one was named Edith, one was named Teresa. They went to the same church when they were little. And then I overheard Teresa later say, I remember when Edith wasn't so religious, because Edith became very religious as we got older. And
you said these are the grandparents?
My grandmothers.
Your grandmothers.
Yes.
Okay, both of them. I see.
So, and my grandfathers were dead by this time, so I didn't really know them. They died.
So they kind of had each other as a connection point. They probably had other children. But
I don't think they cared for each other that much.
I see. Yeah.
But because I had kind of the fun grandmother, and then I had kind of the religious grandmother. But my religious grandmother, Edith, also loved to read movie magazines, so we had so she'd read all the gossip. She knew what was happening with all the TV stars and all that. And then she read the Bible. So it was a little bit of all of that going on.
Right.
And she...
And Edith was your father's or your mother's?
My mother's.
Your mother's mother.
Okay. And then I found out later that she also suffered from depression and was getting treated for it. And I didn't know that until after she died. So she had a lot going on.
Yeah.
Which probably made it makes more sense now why when we went over to her house, we mostly got boiled hot dogs.
Wow.
Because I think she just was doing her best.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's
so.
Gosh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so how long did your grandmother live? How long was she in your life?
They both lived until they're like 90, 93, 94. In fact, Grandma Edith, the religious one, drove until she was at least 90. She lived on a farm.
Wow.
Planted soy soybeans, lived by herself because her husband had died years ago. And yeah.
Did your grandfathers die when you were very young?
Yes. I can barely remember one of them. The other one I don't remember at all.
Right.
And then...
So a few women, as you know, a few important women in your life and your father.
Yeah.
So mostly females, kind of like as in the power, in sort of the head positions of the family.
Weirdly. And especially even like the Mrs. Simmons of it all, because she sort of made religion fun. You know, this lady who would do the church services.
Oh, yeah,
and
right,
the marionettes.
It was the teacher, yes, yeah. Right,
and,
okay, right.
And we also have weirdly distant cousins who are Mennonites, so which are sort of like Amish.
Yeah, right, that's right. Okay, yeah.
So they would come over for family reunions and, you know, kind of stand around and look like Mennonites, and we were all very, you know, taken aback by it because you don't see that every day.
Right, they didn't touch many of the things.
Yeah, they were like very like black or brown clothing, and the women, you know, everyone was just there's no show at all with what they're wearing.
Right,
it's all very so.
And so then back to like post Santa letter success in the paper.
I love reliving that.
You start to have what you're acknowledging is that you're no longer necessarily believing these things. You're starting to sniff some of this stuff out for yourself in a way that doesn't fit any longer.
Yes.
And so so what age are you at this point?
5th grade, 6th grade, you're kind of beginning to question it. And weirdly, when you'd ask a question sometimes like, hey, wait a minute, you know, how come, you know, Jesus did these miracles? How come there haven't been any miracles for years and years and years? Well, don't worry about that.
Yeah, right.
So he rose from the dead, huh? How does that work? And then Presbyterians believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the Trinity. And no one to this day, I have no idea who the Holy Ghost is. But that's also scary for a kid too. It's like, and when you try to explain it, the Presbyterians sort of, I think, and I'm probably getting this completely wrong, so forgive me when you're listening, Presbyterians who know more than I do, that they're the same thing. That they're all the same thing.
Yeah, they're expressions of the same thing. You know what? Actually, this is a great place to jump off right after the break.
Yeah.
But we're going to dig right into the Trinity when we get back, everybody. Hi there, everybody. Welcome back. We're here with Michael Hitchcock. We are digging in to the Holy Ghost and the Trinity, and what does that all mean? What do we remember about how we defined it as a child? How are we trying to come to it now?
I just think when I was a little kid and, you know, you'd hear the word ghost, you're like, what's that all about? Because obviously, you know, we're all scared of ghosts. And
right, yeah. It's interesting. I don't remember the ghost word being like something that really landed with me, but, you know...
I think it depends and honestly, it would be that thing too, because it would be in songs.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
you know, we believe in the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. You're like, well, what is the Holy Ghost if I'm supposed to believe in it? And then most of those kind of questions were answered by "Don't worry about it too much."
Yes.
And then the other one with Presbyterians also, they sort of believe in predestination, which means, you know, everything's preordained. Which I thought, well, doesn't that go completely against, you know, free will? Like, well, if we're all just going to be, if this is all preordained, how in the world could you go to hell if you're preordained from the get-go to be a bad person? Like, how does that work?
Right. It's an amazing conundrum that, like, people, you know, they have always tried to answer. And I mean, one of the things I remember is that they used to say that God knows everything, and God knows everything that you're going to do, but He gives you the opportunity of choice so that it is your free will, but it's a choice He knows you're going to make. It's
strange.
It's a very tricky, and it doesn't make God feel all that welcoming to me.
Right.
When I was younger, I used to find that very disconcerting. I was like, what do you mean? Like, so if I make a bad choice, you knew I was going to make it. If I make a good choice, you knew I was going to make it. Am I,
right.
You know, how does it doesn't feel good. It didn't feel good to me to feel like, you know, I was a marionette to some extent.
Yes, exactly. And then before we leave Ohio, we had, like I said before, like Catholics were considered very exotic. I had an aunt who was Catholic, and I can remember my dad kind of making fun of the Catholic Church, like, oh, they believe that when you eat the cracker and the wine, that it's really Jesus's, flesh and blood, and that's ridiculous, and that's a symbol for us. And if you go into the Catholic Church, there's Christ is hanging on all the crosses, and we believe in the resurrection. We don't believe in that to look at a dead body the whole time.
Right.
Which they believe in the suffering, we believe in the resurrection. I thought, oh. And so you kind of come across with these things like, we're better than them.
Sure,
and then,
sure. Catholics felt that same way,
right.
The opposite way, yeah.
I'm sure they did. And then there were no Jewish people that I knew in our town, except for, weirdly, at one point we had a next door neighbor who was Jewish, and I can remember on Christmas Day, my father joking to like a 9-year-old kid or a 6-year-old kid, I don't remember how old he was. Hey, come on over and you can have some of our ham, ha ha ha.
Oh,
and
wow.
The kid burst out crying as he should have and ran to his parents and I thought, because they would,
right.
My dad thought that to make a funny Jewish joke on Christmas Day would be hilarious, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
So
wow.
so there,
Yeah.
that was considered like so foreign, and then forget anything else like Muslims or anything else. That was unheard of when I grew up, at least in our circle of friends.
Yeah, it was. I absolutely, completely agree with that. I mean, I remember, as we spoke earlier, we grew up in very white communities. I grew up in the suburbs of Omaha, which were entirely white when I was young, and I remember when the first black family moved into that neighborhood, moved into our parish, and I just remember as a relatively young guy, I must have been 8 or 9 or something, and they look different than everyone else. You can't help but notice, like, wow, these people must feel very out of place. They're the only black family here. I never wasn't the same age as their children, so I had no connection to them, but it's always been very impressionable to me when I think back on that memory of if I felt for what they must have been feeling if it was landing on me that there was such difference in the room.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I grew up in such an all-white town where I think my 3rd grade teacher, I think it was 3rd grade, it could have been 4th grade, it could have been 2nd grade. But anyway, one of the elementary school teachers brought in a black man to stand in front of the classroom so that we could look and ask him questions.
Wow.
And I'm thinking back then, like, it was kind of cool, the teacher, considering this is an all-white town, and it was also the 60s, so I think she was being weirdly radical, in quotes, for an Ohio town. But that's how white it was.
Wow.
That,
That this man was like, I know what I'm doing is I'm going in as essentially
I know. So we can ask questions about your skin color and your life.
He knows that he's doing a good work, but he understands that he's so different that I'm doing good for these children by
and
coming
weirdly,
in.
I mean, I'm not saying that's what it's like there now. I'm sure it's changed quite a bit since then, but there's definitely pockets all over America where you kind of stick with your own, and that's it. And that's, I mean, living in Los Angeles where we get a variety of everything. I'm just so grateful that's what it is.
Yeah, me too. Hugely influential on me getting over many of those early perceived differences. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest thing, of course. It's just like these perceptions of difference. Mm-hmm. So you're understanding the difference between the subsidiaries of the larger Christian umbrella.
Right.
You're recognizing that Protestants are different than evangelicals, and evangelicals different from Roman Catholics.
Right.
And you're starting to see
and then
lines that are not right there.
Sure. And then you would have like the parents, you go like, well, what do these evangelicals believe? And go, well, some of them believe every single word in the Bible. And like, we believe that Noah on the ark was probably, it's a tale that teaches a lesson. They believe it absolutely happened. And so that was beginning to get instilled into us where we were a little bit more progressive than, say, some of the other people. Then we moved to the Chicago suburbs. My dad left General Motors and went to a separate engineering firm. And that kicked my religion into a different gear because we grew up in this church So I went from 6th grade through high school. That was kind of a happening church, like a lot of it. It's still that way in the Chicago suburbs and all over, where you get like the popular church, and they've got the cool minister and they got the good choir director, and that's what this church was. And so they had all these just programs where you could go to, you go to summer camp and you go to church camp, out on Lake Michigan, and all these cool activities that we all did and really liked. And now we're in like the 70s, and in the 70s, there was one, I can remember this distinctly. They got the album Jesus Christ Superstar, put it on, and you would sit in the pew and listen to Jesus Christ Superstar and then discuss it.
Wow.
And then The Exorcist came out. And The Exorcist back then, I cannot tell you how much it scared people. Like,
wow.
I saw it and slept with my parents, and I was 14 at the time.
Wow.
I was so scared. And there would be huge sermons about The Exorcist. And does the devil exist? And what is the devil? And, all of that stuff.
Wow, fascinating.
Yeah, it was a crazy time. And then...
So they were very progressive in that they were trying to engage with a kind of cultural discussion. They're sitting here saying, like, look, we can use... they're obviously choosing very specific, Christian symbolisms that, things that are associated with Christianity or with religion in general. But like, they're still using these things as demonstrations and examples for teaching.
Right. And my takeaway from that time period too was, at least in that church at that particular time in that particular town, a lot of it was not only God is love, but they kind of centered on the parables. And to this day, I think the parables are fantastic. So, all these lessons that you can learn in there. And like, if you don't believe in Jesus or whatever, you can still have a great takeaway from, helping your fellow man and helping the least among us. And I have to say that I gave them credit for that. That was by far the best part about it. But we would do like, teen services where like, I can remember one time I wore ripped jeans to church, and I popped up out of an aisle. And started talking about
popped up out of a what?
Out of the aisle, like
I was the aisle. I was like an island.
Yeah,
what?
So there would be like the youth service, and then we had sacred dancers, which were basically girls in high school wearing black leotards, and they would do a ballet number or
amazing
some kind of.
So they're really trying to empower the youth here
yeah.
and make them feel. They rightly understood that if the children aren't engaged, if children at that age aren't engaged, then they're going to be lost, most likely. As even it was probably happening simultaneously in your mind as you're participating in these things sincerely. You're also going through a transition where you're like not sure that this is really what you believe.
And then I was in a children's theater troupe that was we mostly did whatever Wind in the Willows and Alice in Wonderland, but we had one woman who we trouped a show called For Heaven's Sake, which was a musical comedy about religion, but we didn't do the music part of it. We just just said it out loud, like as if it was poetry, and it was. You're
doing like beat poetry to a musical.
It wasn't funny anymore. It was more like we're shouting at people to get saved. And I thought nowadays, like, would that ever happen? Like, I don't know. Like this lady just took upon herself to tour this religious show, and we played many churches doing it. And,
wow! So you're all over the area. You were going around. Performing it.
So you'd be like, you'd wear like tie-dye shirts and, point at people in the aisles and tell them to get saved. And then we'd be doing the Wizard of Oz. So it was like a strange, it was.
And so you're a sophomore in high school or something at this time?
Doing all that stuff. And
did you feel separate from other high school students? Did you recognize that? Were you more involved in Christianity than the average? Or
no, I would say I was pretty average.
Okay.
There were definitely people more than me.
Was it a religious school? No, it was a public school.
It was a public school, but it's a town full of churches.
Okay.
And the Chicago suburbs.
Yeah.
And that's also back still when I assume it's still that way. And some, the high school had Campus Crusade for Christ. And I wasn't involved in that because I was a nerd, and Campus Crusade for Christ was for all the popular kids.
Wow, interesting.
And so I was not, and it was sort of an unknown thing like, oh, no, you're too far down on the food chain to go to Campus Crusade for Christ. so that was for like,
amazing.
yeah, it was for like the jocks. And so
Very
like,
Christian of them.
yes, I know. I know. I still find that fascinating. So, but yeah,
humans
but then,
are humans.
Right. But then again, and then the church was sort of a place to hang. You know what I mean? It wasn't, I can remember one time during high school, we all went to this church camp, and the older kids got busted for drinking, and it was this huge deal. And everyone, so it wasn't
I'm sure
all
that
just,
was a shell.
Yes.
Because you're all under the guise of
Right.
righteousness, and
so it wasn't just church all the time. And then, but as all that's going on, that's when I really did begin to question all of it. That didn't stop me from. We did Godspell my senior year of high school, and I really wanted to A, be in it, and B, play Jesus. And I do remember praying to God that if He gave me the part of Jesus, I would no longer masturbate.
Oh my God, it's so great. I remember the deep conflict about masturbation. Also,
Yes.
man, such deep conflict.
Yeah.
Did you get the part?
I got the part, and I
you
think I
were- and
lasted
then you
about
got
3
screwed.
weeks. I think I lasted 3 weeks, but in fact, I can remember.
You didn't even last through the run of the show.
Oh no, that's for sure.
That must have felt so difficult for you. Here you are performing the role, and you'd made a deal.
I made a deal for the rest of my
and
life.
then you were still
apparently.
masturbating.
Yeah.
That must have felt terrible.
Oh, it was not great. And then
The guilt. Oh, the guilt,
guilt.
the shaming about masturbation.
I had a diary for a while when I was littler and like 14 or whatever. And you'd write in the diary whatever happened that day, but then I'd also have a little star, and the star meant I masturbated.
Amazing. And the star was there to remind you.
I guess.
You think that you
was
were like that, like to shame yourself almost?
I
or-
don't know, but I also think like looking back, like, was I being truthful? Wouldn't I have been doing that every night? But I don't know.
You might have
Apparently
been,
it
look,
wasn't.
I was relatively successful at times. I remember when I could be diligent.
Yeah, I think I was.
It's when I discovered that what dreams are is that, when I would abstain long enough,
Right.
then all of a sudden the body takes care of it.
And we didn't really have shame in our family about it that much, but it just wasn't talked about. So it wasn't like, don't do it, or it's,
Right.
religiously bad. But
Yeah.
But anyway, and my other thing about playing Jesus in Godspell was that summer after I had played Jesus in Godspell, one of my drama teachers got shingles. And she was an older lady who got shingles.
Right.
And she wanted me to come over and hold her hand and help her with her shingles. And so I literally went into her bedroom, and she's like going like, oh, and I would hold her hand. And the only reason I was there is because I had played Jesus in Godspell. And I guess she thought I had magical powers.
Whoa. That's
so-
wild.
and I can
also,
remember-
isn't shingles contagious?
I'm sure, yes. I think it is contagious. You're
I mean,
right.
I don't know. I think you have to have like a low immune system, but I think you're supposed to be careful about shingles.
I just remember at the time going like, this is really weird, and like I am
Wow,
far from Christ-like,
wow.
and yet what am I going to do? Like not hold her hand, and then meanwhile she's just groaning like, oh. So anyway, I did do my.
How long did you do that? Like many days?
No, I only did it once, but
Okay.
it was for a good hour.
Wow.
It was like she.
Oh, geez.
I don't know. That was very strange.
Yeah, man. I mean,
So-
what a fascinating. That's great. I definitely remember those times. Feeling. I remember going through the process of feeling guilty about using prayers as trying to
Bargaining.
leverage them as bargaining.
Yeah.
So you get through Godspell.
Got through Godspell.
And now-
and P.S. Nick, you need to know this.
Oh, I want to hear it. I want to hear what I need to know.
Standing ovations, every performance.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise
Yeah,
me,
I
but
just-
it is nice to hear.
Yeah. Now, looking back, if you go to any high school show, they always get standing ovations. But at the time, I didn't know that.
How many performances did you get? I remember that I think we only got to do 2 weekends of like 3 performances each or something.
That sounds
when I
about
was
right.
young.
But then it was popular, so we got to bring it back.
Oh, you were so good.
Oh, we were so good. Although the second time around, I left out an entire chunk, and we just didn't do part of it because
I have a
forgot.
memory of that too in college. And actually the woman who was the lead opposite me, her parents were in town to visit that show, and I screwed up the show and like skipped her whole scene, and like she was so sad and crying at the end of it. It's still a painful memory. So we'll come back and talk more about post Godspell right after this.
Ooh.
Hi, so I'm talking to Michael Hitchcock, and we're just finishing up. We're getting towards the end of like high school and sort of the beginning of him entering into that, post-18, early adulthood stage. And for you, that was a transition out, like probably a more significant transition, another step in the direction of leaving the church, or am I wrong?
Yeah, we're getting there. Although I went to college and did college things and did the fraternity and all that stuff and didn't go to church at all. And then I moved out here for grad school. I went to UCLA grad school and
directly out of bachelor's.
After my bachelor's at Northwestern, and then
so you're 22, 23.
So I'm 22ish, and honestly, to meet people, I joined the Bel Air Presbyterian Church, which is up on Mulholland, a beautiful, beautiful church. And it was also one of the it's a big popular church. And at the time, the guy who was the preacher was the big, like UCLA football star, and all that business. So it was that kind of a thing. But when I was there, two things happened. One, I helped with the youth group, and I found out that this Presbyterian church, the youth group, I'm not talking about the whole thing, but at that time, the people that were in charge of the youth group were very fundamentalist. And I thought, this is not how I grew up. And I don't believe in what they're teaching so much. And then I was also at the same time going to join the church, and you have to at one point say, I believe in Jesus Christ. And I remember in the little thing saying, I don't know if I do.
Yeah.
And then everybody looked at me like, you're going straight to hell, and what's happening, and da-da-da-da-da. And I remember then recounting later and then recanting later and saying I did. Wow. But I really, I doubted it. And then I left not too long. I think after college I was sort of done with them. And
did you
I
ever...
haven't really...
Oh, so go ahead.
Yeah, that was sort of it.
Did you ever feel like you had to have a conversation with your parents about it? Like, you'd go back and they would want to go to Mass, and so you'd just go to Mass with them?
Well, we don't go to Mass.
Oh, I'm sorry, right. Yes, that's a very Roman Catholic thing. Yeah, that's right. Well, there you go. So you would go to church and...
we would
that's so funny, but that's exactly right.
Yeah, it would be more... Yes, we would begin to have those conversations, and then they were never horrified. It would be like, oh, come on, just go. You're going to see some people. You're going to...
But they were never... and you mentioned that they were progressive, and so in that way they were progressive enough to understand, like, hey, he wants to go his own way. They weren't going to feel offended by your choice. Right. They didn't feel threatened by your leaving the church, or you were never aggressive about it. Or
I think church for many people, including. There's certainly, I'm not going to discount their spiritual beliefs, but a lot of it is also for the social aspect of it, and the potluck dinners and the ice cream socials and
community building.
Yes, and canned food drives and all of that business. So, and I think that was a big part of us growing up, and less about Revelations 4:18 or whatever. So this says this, and so this must be true.
So then you're not really getting much pressure from your parents.
Not that much.
You're able to sort of just enter into your adulthood, your early adulthood. Mm-hmm. You're, pursuing your career and all this stuff. But at the time, obviously, like any human does, you're starting to engage with these questions on your own. Yeah. And how did you then? What's the bridge between that moment and today? Where does your mind start to? Are there twists and turns? Is there a slowly evolving belief?
I think the way, just because of, and I'm certainly not a Bible scholar at all, but part of what I kind of transitioned in, there was probably this guy named Jesus at one time. He probably did some great things and taught some good lessons. And I'm leaving it at that. You know what I mean? Like, forget the resurrection, forget the virgin birth. This guy was, he kind of shook up the system a little bit, as did many other people in that time period.
Yes.
And that's sort of where I'm at with, he questioned, the government, he questioned how things were run.
Yes.
And that's where
rebellious.
I am. And I'm sort of like, I do believe that there is a heaven. I don't know if I believe there's a hell.
Interesting.
I don't know how any of that works, because I don't know. Hitler would not be in heaven.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how any of that works. I just think, and honestly, part of that came about from when my mom died back in like 2006. And I just thought, like, well, she's around somewhere.
Yeah.
Her spirit's around somewhere. At least I believe that.
Yeah.
And then you go like, are you believing that only because you don't want her dead completely? And that may be true.
Yeah, but it's a comfort for you, and it feels. And do you feel like you live with it in other ways? Like, do you feel like you live with, other people that have died around you, or do you?
Yes,
are you someone that believes in the spirit world to some extent?
I do a little bit.
Yeah,
because my mom grew up. She was a nurse, and I always think if someone died in a car accident that we knew or something like that, hey, Mom, can you take care of them for a while or say hello to them or that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then I have another friend who died of cancer, and I always think of her too, and
that's beautiful.
Like they're up there somewhere helping me.
So so you have an active dialogue with these. I mean, not active, I should say, but what I mean is you're not afraid to be like, this person lives close to you, and so you can talk to this person.
I think
times.
so.
Yeah,
and it may be just wishful thinking, and it probably is that, but that's where I'm at. And as far as the whole Jesus thing goes, I'm agnostic in that regard. Like, we're going to find out sooner or later. We just don't know just yet.
Do you feel? It doesn't appear this way, but do you feel like you seem to be comfortable not needing to answer some of these questions in any definitive way? You're happy to sort of like live with. Because there's mystery, right? There's mystery in the universe.
Right.
Even the most staunch atheist would have to acknowledge at a certain point there is mystery, right?
Yeah.
And so we can talk about the spectrum of mystery, and there are many different beliefs in that. And it seems like you're just kind of you're happy not needing to answer any more of these questions more directly. You're saying I believe in heaven, I don't believe in hell. How that works, I'm okay with not knowing, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I don't even know if heaven is the right term.
Sure.
It could just be the way almost Native Americans believe in, that we're all just part of energy or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, it's not that I'm happy with being ignorant. It's more.
I don't mean I don't mean to imply ignorance. I guess I just mean to imply a sort of not a driving. Not a driving.
I guess when you meet people from other religions and everything else, and you go like, they're not going to go to hell. Why would they go to hell? Or there was that weird thing with Christianity, which would be like, if you don't say that you're,
of course,
you believe in Jesus as your savior, you're going to hell, even if you were, building homes for humanity every second of your day, like that.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
That makes no sense.
Terrifying.
Or like little babies who weren't baptized and all these weird rules, and you're like, come on. So, and then meeting people from many, many different faiths, and also. Flat out atheists who are great people. Like they're not. I don't get that. So,
yes.
Do you feel? I just deny it.
Do you feel? Is there a place for you that has taken the place of the church for you? Because it seems like when you were young, this was a very comforting environment, to the point that you even explored it a little bit when you moved out here. Is there? Have you found the?
I think sometimes with church, no matter what, you're trying to find your family. Mm-hmm. You're trying to find people, like-minded people. Weirdly, I found that in a comedy group. Mm-hmm.
It's not weirdly to me, but
I kind of switched from going to church to doing improv comedy at a place called the Groundlings, and they became my like little surrogate family. And you begin to believe in, I don't know, just positive reinforcement and positive feelings and laughter and all of that.
Right. And you're creating things together. Right. You're creating stories together, and that's at the core of religion in general.
And as time goes on, as far as without bashing, I don't want to bash Christianity, but I get sometimes where I'm like, they get weirdly obsessed with sex, and especially the whole virgin birth thing. You think like, this woman was so special that she hadn't had sex, and yet she had a baby.
Right.
So
God
she's
specifically
really
chose
good,
her,
right? And that anyone who had sex, no, thank you. They're written off. They're dirty, and that somehow God's magical sperm.
Yes.
So it's
so that may so I'm sorry that remains a very sore to date. That's one of the things that can still grip you as far as like maybe enrage you. Or,
right. And even today with even the fundamentalists, when people are talking about marriages between one man and one woman, you go, really? Because if you look at the Old Testament, it wasn't between one man and one woman. Almost every single person in the Old Testament had several wives and concubines.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so if you're going to quote the Bible, maybe that's what we should all be doing. Like, just marry a lot of people.
Right.
Because that's what it used to be. In fact, even, and I think, and I may be wrong, but even in the New Testament times, that practice was still going on.
Yes.
So...
certainly in some communities or some, or depending on your social status, you were allowed to do those types of things.
Right. And even if you weren't, let's say it was one man and one woman, it wasn't true love. It was, they were, you were basically given, it was all arranged marriages. So there was no love involved. It usually involved cattle or, some kind of dowry.
Right.
So,
So now you don't. Well, you still do a lot of improv, and you don't do it, consistently in the Groundlings because now you've had this professional career now for a long time. It's a vibrant career. Do you find that going back to doing improv in some ways does that feed you more in this kind of from this realm of spirituality more than just writing on a successful show or acting in a particular?
I think
film?
sometimes what I like about those what I'm drawn to is the community aspect of a bunch of people in a place, in a room or whatever, at the same time experiencing joy. And it's the same thing that you can happen if you see, a movie where the whole audience is, when you actually go to the movie theater. And I'm sure you can do it at home too, when there's 6 people watching Netflix together or 2 people or whatever. It's that community of joy. And that's what
Yeah,
my best experiences have been that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Do you have? You were talking a little bit to me earlier before we started the interview about your siblings. Do you feel like your siblings have shared your progression through life in this way?
We're all pretty much on the same page.
Yeah, cool.
I don't have anybody who's I'd certainly have relatives who are quite fundamentalist and what have you, but there's other sides of the family that are just sort of like we'll find out later. So, which is kind of good, I guess. Yeah.
Well, so that's good. So, but that's nice that you had a supportive upbringing in that. That like you've never felt.
Not so much. Although I have to say, on my one side, my grandma Edith, she thought everyone on the Titanic went to hell because they were playing cards when the ship went down.
Oh, really? So, that's like something she said?
Yes. So,
that's amazing.
So gambling
because they were involved in a sinful activity at the moment of their death and were not able to repent. That was their lot.
She had a lot of things smoking cigarettes was a sin. In fact, my mom smoked, but she smoked only in her bathroom with the door shut, and because she felt guilty about it. And P.S., my grandmother at that time lived 300 miles away, so she wasn't going to smell the smoke.
Yeah.
But it was that thing of these things got ingrained in you that these were sinful. Divorce was unheard of back then, and it wasn't unheard of.
But, but I mean, to do it though was so
in the family. In the family would be like, oh no, we heard those things like you make your bed, you lie in it, type of stuff.
Yes, right, right. It's interesting. It's interesting. This is obviously this opens up a larger discussion that we don't have the time for right now, but maybe we will another day. But it's just sort of like talking about the generational shift. I can certainly see that in my grandparents. Or my grandmother, who is my primary. I only had one grandparent really that lived long enough for me to know them, and she definitely, you saw it. She just did not seem to pursue an independent joy. Not that she was totally unhappy, but she never took chances in arenas where we would certainly not have allowed ourselves at this stage to lock ourselves into certain patterns, but. It's interesting to talk about what that means, from generational shift.
Yeah. And I think with many of us with organized religion over the years is you see the corruption, you see the hypocrisy, and that left a very bad stain in my mouth. I think with a lot of people. So I think people can explore what they want, but the whole organized thing sometimes is like, no, thank you.
Yeah, it has not made a particularly good transition to 24-hour news, you know.
No.
The church has been exposed.
Yeah.
And it's a heavy way to land because this is the end of the conversation.
Oh.
But and you know, but this is where it brings us. Look, there are delicacies in the title for a reason.
That's right. Well, if you ever have shingles, I'll be happy to hold your hand.
I will grunt and moan the loudest you've ever heard. Michael Hitchcock, it has been an absolute joy having you here, man.
My pleasure, Nick.
You know, you're a dear friend, and I appreciate you taking this ride. So thank you all for listening.